Hello. Today we will have the final lecture on statehood. In the first lecture, I said that the state should be able to carry the entire function of governance. For this, the architecture of bodies of state power, that is, their nomenclature, functions, powers, interconnections, must be consistent with the structure of the entire function of governance in relation to society. If statehood is not capable of carrying the entire function of governance, then sovereignty can only be declarative, since the non-provision, the non-support of different stages of the entire function of governance towards professional activity, guarantees that someone will invade these stages of the entire function of governance with his own interests, and, to one degree or another, sovereignty will be lost. Therefore, building the structure of bodies of state power in accordance with the entire function of governance is always a relevant task, and maintaining this correspondence is also a necessary thing. Further arises the question of sovereignty in its entirety, because state power can carry the entire function of governance, but if it is corporate elite, then society will become a victim of the corporation that has the entire function of governance, as it happened in Egypt, when that Jret's power degraded, became pseudo-Jret's power, and actually organized, first in Egypt, a system of total slavery, and then they began to expand this system to neighboring regions, striving for global, undivided power over humanity in the name of God. Therefore, sovereignty in its entirety is the sovereignty of a society which, in order to carry sovereignty, must carry a certain culture, improve this culture, and the knowledge necessary for the implementation of the entire function of governance in relation to society has to be accessible for everyone. The second lecture was devoted to the fact that it is not the organizational staff structures that work, but people. In other words, you can build a statehood which is impeccable in functionality, but if people do not understand the purpose of certain elements of the statehood, do not understand their functions, do not know how to use them, then this structure will not work. This happened in the Soviet Union, because the state system prescribed by the Constitution of 1936 was much more perfect, more democratic than any other state structures that history has known since the days of the liquidation of ancient Egypt in the process of the carrying out of the biblical project of enslaving mankind. The fact that it is people who work, but not organizational staff structures, led us to the question of what a mafia is. I said that there are certain principles of how people interact with each other. These principles are not removable, because they are inherent for all more or less physically healthy people. All people have interests. If there is a certain plurality of people, then in this plurality of people a sub-plurality may arise, whose interests are identical or mutually supplement each other. Having a commonality, or mutual supplementarity of interests, people begin to interact with each other in order to realize these interests. Herewith, functional duties, responsibility, powers in such systems, interactions, are usually established in an unformalized way. The distribution and redistribution of duties and powers is dynamic in nature, and is determined by both the circumstances faced by such a system of interaction between people and the composition, personal composition of the participants in the system. You see, since it is inherent to people, it is natural for them. People do not pay attention to the principles of interaction of this kind until the activities of such systems, to which they do not belong, begin to affect them. If such mutually supplementary interests and common interests do not, directly or indirectly, harm others, they are perceived as natural, and the activity of their implementation also does not cause any objections, because it's considered natural. And such systems exist and do not have any names. But if the activity of such systems affects other people, causes this or that damage to society, is criminal in the juridical sense, because criminal in the juridical sense is not always criminal in relation to society. In particular, the Russian proverb says, "Sinless before God, innocent before the Tsar." It is precisely about the fact that natural laws given by God are one thing, and jurisprudence generated by society is another. And in cases where jurisprudence acts against providence, the principle, sinless before God, innocent before the Tsar, works. But nonetheless, since the juridical system in societies is developed, and it works, then there also exist criminal activities from the point of view of jurisprudence. When such interests are of an antisocial or criminal character, then verbal characteristics of this kind of activity and associations of people who are engaged in this activity undoubtedly appear. It can be called a gang, a band. From the Italian language we have the word mafia. And although the principles on which the unformalized interactions of people are based are the same for criminal and non-criminal activities, nonetheless, a number of listeners were outraged that the word mafia was used, and that Sobornost was described as a kind of mafia. What to say? You see, the word mafia does exist. It has been in political and social circulation since around the second half of the 19th century. Look at the history of its origin, the history of its use. In general, it turns out that the principles behind the word mafia are universal. And since the word mafia acquired the character of something reprehensible due to the fact that society paid attention to the antisocial activities of mafia groupings and did not pay attention to activities analogous in organizational principles which are not criminal or antisocial, therefore the word mafia acquired a negative character. But what about the principles? How should we relate to them? Moreover, these principles are an integral property of a person. It turns out that the word Sobornost in the Russian language acquired the meaning ascribed to this word in the conception of social safety. This word has had this meaning since around the first half of the 19th century, from the works of A. Khomyakov. When Khomyakov wrote about Sobornost, he wrote that the peasant, being in Sobornost, can in reason the bishop and the Tsar, and this would be completely normal. But you see, in relation to the strata caste hierarchy of that time, Sobornost was not normal, because Sobornost does not imply the existence of a strata caste hierarchy, but presupposes the same dynamic redistribution of powers and responsibilities. And as a result of this dynamic redistribution of powers and responsibilities, situations could arise in which the peasant was obliged to in reason the head of state, and the head of state was obliged to obediently listen to this and accept it for further guidance in his actions, with gratitude to this peasant and to God. The word Sobornost in Russian, in this sense, has existed since at least the first half of the 19th century, from the works of Khomyakov. Well, now, just a little more time and the first half of the 21st century will end. This is not a very long time. This time will pass by about as fast as the first quarter of the 21st century. Well, where is Sobornost as a living phenomenon, as the norm of our society? It is absent. Why? Because, having characterized the manifestations of Sobornost in life, in essence correctly, Khomyakov did not give anything concerning the description of the work of man's psyche, the principles of interaction of people with each other, which allow generating this very Sobornost. When I said that Sobornost is a kind of mafia, I had in my view the principles on which an unformalized interaction of people with each other is built, which is characterized by dynamic redistribution of powers and responsibilities. That is, structureless governance, and governance on the basis of virtual structures. I was talking about the principles, but not the words. And the fact that there are no words in our culture that characterize these principles is a historical fact. The fact that these principles are behind that social phenomenon, which is of a criminal nature, and received the name mafia, is also a historical fact. It is hardly purpose consonant to invent some incomprehensible word in order to characterize these principles. But these principles are inherent, not only for the mafia or for Sobornost, they are actually inherent for man. So what will appear as a result of the implementation of these principles? A bandit group that keeps in fear not only the entire district, but sometimes several states. This also happens in history. Or it will be Sobornost. This is determined by the organization of the psyche of those people who exercise these principles in interpersonal interaction in their life. The type of psyche structure is human, if, in terms of functionality, according to our army typology, people are sole commanders, that is, people who take responsibility for themselves, are able to set tasks for themselves, are able to set tasks for subordinates and organize their work, are able to support the actions of the sole commanders of the same level in line with a common conception, a common cause, if they are able to prevent the errors of the higher leadership, when Khomyakov says that the peasant in Sobornost can in reason a Tsar and a bishop, what he actually means is to prevent errors of higher leadership. And if the higher leadership are also sole commanders and carriers of the human type of psyche structure, then those principles realize Sobornost. But if they have no human type of psyche structure, no relation towards responsibility for a common cause, and people are like grass on the battlefield, or what we are ordered to do, that we will do, and what we are not ordered to do, we will not do that. And we won't think about it either, because there is no order. In this case, Sobornost will not appear. Therefore, those people who reacted extremely negatively to the fact that Sobornost is a kind of mafia, they think by words. And in this case you need to feel life, and think not by words, but by phenomena, by processes. If you think by processes, then the mafia is not a criminal mafia. These are the same principles that are implemented on the basis of non-human types of psyche structure and functionalities of the executioners, pawns, the deputies, middle-level bosses, and the sole commanders, mafia bosses and mafia generals. If the same principles are implemented on the basis of the human type of psyche structure and the functionality, the sole commanders, then there is no other way but the way to Sobornost. You can chant the word Sobornost from morning till night, in much the same way as Hare Krishnas say Hare Krishna, but there will be no Sobornost in life. Further, in the third lecture we talked about the juridical system of society, about the fact that it implements a structural method of governance, and in the future, with the correct development of society, the criminal code will go into the historical past, but the juridical system will merge almost completely with the system of standardization and certification of products that provide the life of civilization based on the technosphere and professional specialization and the unification of labor in society. But here one more question arises. You see, from ancient times there appeared a saying, from rags to riches. It implied the fact that the skills characteristic of the performance of princely duties, that is, the organization of the peaceful life of society, the organization of military activities in that era, they were taught according to the principle from father to son. And if a person was born into a family of a peasant or a craftsman, then in the preponderance of cases, he could not develop the knowledge and skills necessary for the implementation of princely functions. Therefore the saying, from rags to riches, was justified, and determined a lot in the life of society, precisely because any activity requires certain knowledge, which is transformed into practical skills. The saying, do not get into another one's sleigh, is about the same thing. Although in fact it carries more of a consumeristic character, but nonetheless, the sleigh is a metaphor, which also denotes a place in social organization and the functions connected with this place. To put it another way, there was no terminological apparatus of science yet, and metaphorical indications of very important social objective laws in culture were already in the form of some sayings, in some cases folk tales, Billinic plots. But if we talk about that era, knowledge, although it was necessary, but in fact the primitive level of development of the technosphere in comparison with our times allowed transmitting such skills and knowledge from generation to generation, actually, without that which in our time has received the name scientific-methodological support of state governance. Scientific-methodological support of state governance in our era and in the foreseeable future is the most important component of the culture of society. And if it does not exist, if it is defective, whether you like it or not, society will experience certain problems. And these problems will be generated by the fact that the current legislation will conflict with the objective laws to which the following is subordinated: the life of society, the life of people, and accordingly, law-abidingness, that is, innocent before the Tsar. Law-abidingness will automatically generate the situation innocent before the Tsar, but sinful before God. Because the life of society should anyway flow in line with the action of the objective laws in such a way that they support the stability of society, support its development, and so that everything is good, both in a certain sense and in the sense of side effects that accompany any activity. And these side effects should not devalue the results of this activity and reduce its quality. That is, the addition from accompanying effects should improve the previously planned result. If we talk about the scientific methodological support of state governance, then the young ladies who were taken off the balance beam and put in the State Duma, as well as singers, other athletes, lawyers who found themselves in the State Duma, in bodies of state power, they for the most part do not understand the words scientific methodological support of state governance. The need to work out adequate scientific methodological support of state governance, and the need to allow into bodies of state power only those people who carry adequate scientific theories in their psyche and can transform them into governorial skills so that problems disappear from the life of society. New problems do not arise, and society develops successfully without a crisis. In other words, our society and the state power that is above it, they abide in a deep worldview crisis, and the problem is not being solved mainly because it is not recognized as a problem. Because if we turn to life, then what are the objections? Mikhail Viktorovich, we have a lot of higher educational institutes where there are faculties of state and municipal governance, there are sociological faculties, there is the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration of the Russian Federation, there are law faculties, and we graduate many specialists in the field of social governance, including state and municipal governance. In general, as it was said in one of the folk tales, the words belong to a wise cat. Yes, you have many scientists, and this may indicate the flourishing of science, but on the other hand, it may indicate the decline of science. Therefore, we should not delude ourselves that almost every institution of higher education has a faculty of state and municipal governance. A lot of lawyers, economists, specialists in state and municipal governance are being trained and graduated every year. There is one simple criterion. Here I am now sitting in a room. I am not afraid that the ceilings will collapse, the walls will collapse. I am not afraid for the simple reason that the strength of materials is a science, and the building in which the developer of its construction more or less correctly applied Hooke's law and other theories from strength of materials will guaranteedly stand until the physical exhaustion or obsolescence of its resource or destruction for other reasons. If something is broken somewhere, then Hooke's law is not to blame. Some dolt is to blame, who failed to correctly use Hooke's law in calculations. Or another dolt who violated the technology in the production of the structure. Or a third dolt who was able to shove the technique into the off-design mode in which it guaranteedly breaks. That is, the strength of materials meets the principle of practice is the criterion of truth, and accordingly, if all our education in the field of sociology and politology, state and municipal governance, economics and jurisprudence is scientifically inconsistent, then the crisis in which Russia has been over the past 25 years, and in fact even more, just in those days the crisis was in the Soviet Union but not in Russia, as in a juridically sovereign state. This is an indicator of the fact that, first of all, the scientific methodological support of state governance is inadequate. Because if you turn to the picture which I often show, today I won't show it, you yourselves remember, science, the system of education, the mentality of officials, then practical activities, the flow of incoming information correlates with what was taught at school and higher educational institutions, the spectrum of governorial decisions. Then, if at the entrance into this process there stands defective science, then the quality of life will be nothing. But science as an element of culture cannot be absolutely absurd and defective. Science is always of an applied character, including even fundamental science, which is not always directly applied in nature, but indirectly it is also of an applied character. And the American economist, J. Galbraith, this was Roosevelt's assistant during World War II, Kennedy's assistant on the economy, a man rejected by the political culture of America. He directly wrote that all economic theories are institutional in the sense that they form the standards of reaction to situations of a multitude of clerks who work in the field of economy. But the same applies to all theories that explain the life of society. And even if there is some kind of absurdity in theories, then this absurdity is also institutional in character, because people enslaved by this nonsense are doomed to make those governorial decisions that are necessary for the owners of this system of scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in business. If we turn to the history of Russia, Then, since the time of Peter the Great, we have had Western science. We have taken from the West in a ready-to-use form a lot of scientific theories. We have perceived the organizational structure of science as a system of the Academy of Sciences, higher educational institutions, research institutions, initially subordinate to the Academy of Sciences and then to departments. And if we talk about the structure of scientific knowledge, then in fact, there are no special problems with natural science, although natural science and its applied branches generate problems in the course of applying a theory to solving practical tasks. But these problems are conditioned not so much by mistakes of natural science itself, as by the mistakes and inconsistency of the humanitarian disciplines, that is, those disciplines that should tell everyone about what a human is, who a human is, how human society lives, how it interacts with the biosphere, the cosmos, how the generated by people technosphere impacts people in the biosphere, what is useful for a human in this interaction, what is acceptable, and what is simply unacceptable. All this thematics is the sphere of activity of the humanities. Well, in the field of humanities, the key science for everything is psychology, because all the achievements of mankind and all the mistakes and vices of mankind are the result of the psychic activity of people. And accordingly, if psychological science describes the psychic activity of people adequately and is able to give recipes for achieving the most effective activity of the psyche, the work of the psyche, then the spread of this kind of knowledge inevitably leads to the fact that in all spheres of activity the number of mistakes will decrease. And so it turns out that in the system of bodies of state power, some bodies of state power should be responsible for science and for its development, for filtering out general scientific graphomania, which unfortunately is present, and is not just present, but is the basis of the bulk of publications, and they should be responsible for the introduction of the achievements of science into the system of education, well, and as a result, into practical activities on the basis of building a system of lifelong education for adults, and the formation of the mentality and professional competence of new generations. Moreover, if we talk about this side of the matter, then it's impossible to build such activity on the basis of mere statistics of publications, quotation ratings, and everything else. This kind of system can only be built on the basis of detecting problems and correlating with real problems those scientific theories that science offers. Therefore, today's life requires the integration of scientific organizations into the system of bodies of state power, and the Ministry of Science and Education, in the form in which it exists, definitely cannot cope with this task. Another element of the system which should also deal with this sphere substantively is the special services. In fact, everything related to the work of the special services in Russia took shape during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and whether someone likes it or not, Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria made a great contribution to making the system sufficiently effective for its era. If we talk about this system, then it is oriented mainly on preventing the leak of protected information to potential opponents and geopolitical competitors of the country. If we consider the question of informational algorithmic safety of governance and self-governance of society in a broader context, then protecting information from unauthorized access is only one part of ensuring the informational algorithmic safety of governance and stability of governance. And the second part is that the system should, in some way, protect its governance from introduction into it of information and algorithmics generated by geopolitical competitors and potential and real enemies. And since globalization is a hybrid war, the enemies for the most part are not potential, but real, although there is no hot war. In a hybrid war, they can introduce information and algorithmics that will distort the character of state governance, the character of governance in business, in order to solve the tasks set against us by those who introduce this kind of information and algorithmics into our culture. If we correlate this with the understanding of informational algorithmic safety of governance, it turns out that the comrades Chekists in intelligence agencies have nothing to be proud of. They have nothing to be proud of since Soviet times. The other day there was a program on REN TV channel on the theme that there were colossal leaks of information from the Soviet space industry to the Americans at NASA. And NASA, in fact, knew almost everything about our programs concerning the development of space technology. That is, there were leaks. and the KGB of the USSR did not cope with the prevention of these leaks the way it should have done. There is one more thing. There are photos where Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin and other cosmonauts are standing in the aerodynamic laboratory, and on the aerodynamic scales there is an aircraft, the aerodynamic components of which are such that everyone will understand that this aircraft is not able to take off like an airplane, and it can only enter from the cosmos into dense layers of the atmosphere and land like an airplane at a previously prepared airfield. This photo is an allusion to the fact that the work on the Soviet shuttle was curtailed almost before analogous work began in the United States. One can of course say a lot about the fact that the cost of delivering a kilogram of cargo into orbit on the Soyuz is less than on the shuttle, but nonetheless, the shuttle is a new level of development of space technology, other possibilities of action in near space, and the question of whether it is purpose consonant to develop this program or it is purpose consonant to curtail it cannot be reduced to commercial efficiency. In fact, to reduce everything to commercial efficiency of this or that project is idiocy for two reasons. First, the price current is the vector of error of governance. Accordingly, any price is primarily a measure of the shortage of a certain product in relation to the needs of society. Second, scientific technological progress requires investments, expenses purpose-orientedly invested in something, and accordingly, the question of the purpose orientation of certain programs of scientific research and design developments should be reduced to what these developments can give, but not to how much they will cost. Because what, in terms of cost price, is unattainable now, by strength of the same scientific technological progress, it will be quite realistically attainable after some time, and orient itself on today's opportunities. Speaking about the future, this is a pointless thing. Therefore, it would not be harmful for comrades Chekists to think about the scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in the economy as a factor in ensuring the safety of society and the state. And again, it turns out that they will have to study, and will have to, in some way, participate in scientific research, supervise it, delve into it. Because if they do not do this substantively, then geopolitical opponents and competitors will do it in relation to us substantively. And they will do this to the detriment of us quite effectively, as experience has shown, after the adoption in the US of the National Security Council Directive No. 20/1, August 18, 1948, Objectives with respect to Russia, according to which the Soviet Union was dismantled into a lot of juridically sovereign states. Soviet power was eliminated. Military and economic power is in fact a debatable issue. The state of science, yes, there are some achievements, but in general, degradation. The state of the system of education is on the whole degrading in comparison with what it was in the Soviet Union, if we talk about what school graduates know and what tasks in physics, mathematics, and chemistry they can solve. Therefore, the question of scientific methodological support of state governance is a very, very important question, the significance of which is not realized by the State Duma, the government, the presidential administration, or the Academy of Sciences. Because the Academy of Sciences, in the field of all sociological disciplines, since perhaps the 1920s of the last century, has been engaged in graphomania and rewriting and translation of Western sources, their interpretation in relation to our reality. In particular, one of these dangerous examples. In the West, the conception of the state of nations is the norm. Yes, most European states have developed as mono-ethnic states. National minorities usually lived in border areas and were factually integrated into the society of the titular nation, because bilingualism is the norm. Russia, de facto, is a state of many peoples. All peoples who live in Russia, one way or another, contribute to the development of the common-for-all state, the common-for-all culture. And if we talk about how this state takes shape, it takes shape in the sense that it is constantly reproduced in the course of the historical process, in what happens in its economy and science. And yes, indeed, the Russian language is a cultural factor that unites all peoples. But if we talk about our culture from the standpoint of the great Russian nationalism, then the results will be in fact discouraging. Because you can play such a game, we name a figure of science, technology, culture, and then we look at what will disappear in our culture if he is removed from history. Konstantin Edvardovich Tsiolkovsky, Ancestors are Poles, he is not Russian. We remove him, all theoretical astronautics disappears. Václav Ivanovich Lapushinsky, a Pole, a railway engineer, an outstanding designer of steam locomotives for his era. For us, these are two epoch-making steam locomotives, Type O steam locomotives and Type E. E steam locomotives are the most massive steam locomotive in the history of the railway business, produced for more than 40 years. OV-type locomotives carried armored trains in the Civil War, the Great Patriotic War. On steam locomotives of the E-type, we egressed from the post-war devastation after the Civil War, traveled through the first 5-year plans, created an industrial base that made it possible to win during the Great Patriotic War. We drove them throughout the Great Patriotic War and the restoration of the national economic complex after the war. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, also of Polish roots. If we remove him, quite a large amount of music disappears. Saltykov-Shchedrin, judging by the name Saltykov, there were Tatars among his ancestors. Sociology disappears in the form of fiction writing. Aviation Design Bureau MIG, Artyom Ivanovich Mikoyan and Mikhail Yosevich Guryevich are also not Russian. So there is no need to twitch on the theme of great Russian nationalism, because the greatness and power of Russia as a multinational state has been created throughout the centuries by the contribution of the best representatives of all the peoples of the country. And if, for example, other multinational empires were built on the principle where the titular nation, the imperial nation, pulled down all others who were conquered and purpose-orientedly assimilated them, Russia, however, developed according to a different principle. In the imperial period, in the Tsarist pre-imperial period, the governing stratum of Russia was multinational, and if some peoples who found themselves within the Russian state were not represented in this governing stratum, then there was simply not enough time for their representatives to enter there, and they all considered themselves Russian. There was such an admiral, N.K. Krabbe. Admiral Krabbe is an undeservedly forgotten figure in the Navy, who made a great contribution to the restoration of Russia's naval power after the defeat in the Crimean War, and the transition from wooden ships with smooth-bore artillery to armored ships with rifled artillery. Because of ignorance, he was accused of being German but not Russian. Krabbe objected, "How am I a German? My father is a Finn, my mother is Moldovan. I was born in the Armenian quarter of Tbilisi, baptized in Orthodoxy. I am truly a Russian person." The fact that he is truly a Russian person, he proved by his contribution to the development of the country, its military power. Now we live when de jure everyone is equal before the law, regardless of their national origin. Supposedly, everyone has an opportunity to enter bodies of state power, science, and all spheres of activity. But in fact, this is not the case, because the cadre politics in post-Soviet Russia is carried out on the basis of the principles of the tribal ancestral system. That is, if you belong to a certain clan by kinship, marriage, or by adoption, then you have the right to hold a certain state position, run protection rackets for businesses, or be the owner of a certain business. If you do not belong to these clans, at the least they didn't adopt you, then you should live in the mode of a punching bag. What they do, it must be taken as a given, without a murmur. If you don't agree with this, then the juridical system will convincingly explain this to you, although the corpus delicti will not correspond to why you are brought to justice. Such cadre politics really does not bode well for the future. When a person with a basic education, a gynecologist, turns out to be the head of a research institute where they deal with nuclear technologies, then nothing good can be expected. And this is not the only case, but this is the norm for the cadre politics of the tribal ancestral system, according to which the one born with a silver spoon should receive large salaries, have large profits from business, and the slaves should work like draft horses and be grateful for the fact that they are allowed to work like draft horses. Here is the latest data, recently published. 3% of the country's population owns about 90% of all cash and deposits. But what about the rest of the 97%? And what are their prospects? On condition that the economy works not towards meeting the needs of society, not towards ensuring the development of society, but towards the commercial efficiency of the owners of certain enterprises. In general, nothing good awaits, and as long as the state of affairs and cadre politics in line with the tribal ancestral system persist, the crisis in Russia will worsen. There are no miracles in the world. The objective laws, which the governing elites do not want to follow and build politics on their basis, work automatically, regardless of their desire, their will. Therefore, there will be troubles. In order to avoid troubles, a different scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in the economy is required. A different cadre politics is required, in which the main thing is the nravious ethical qualities of people, on condition that they have the necessary professionalism, knowledge, and creative potential in order to hold certain positions. The transition to such cadre politics, the transition to the right scientific methodological support of state governance by issuing decrees and guiding documents is unattainable, because decrees, guiding documents, they are implemented into life by people who are characterized by the nraviousness and ethics of the tribal ancestral system, baronial servile relations, and accordingly, the mafias which are formed on the basis of herd-pack instincts with non-human types of psyche structure control the state apparatus totally, business totally, intelligence agencies totally. And this means, I will say it once again, society must change itself. That is, people must themselves work out this very scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in the economy. The last time I answered questions, I was distracted by something I did not answer in the question about Tsarist information. There is a metaphor in the conception of social safety, which appeared back in the 1990s, that information in some cases is Tsarist. Behind this metaphor is the fact that this information is inapplicable in everyday life. It is inapplicable in business, because by its nature, it affects society as a whole, and is necessary precisely for state governance. So if, in the historical past, the Tsarist information really concerned only the heads of state and a narrow circle of people close to him, and even if it found its way into the psyche of ordinary people, merchants, they could not use it in the conditions of the straighter caste society, division on the basis of wealth, educatedness. But now the circumstances are different. Almost all citizens, the entire adult population, adolescents, encounter Tsarist information in one way or another. And it turns out that not all representatives of state power realize that this is really Tsarist information, that it must be used precisely for the correct governance towards the state in the interests of the development of society. And outside the bodies of state power, outside the officialdom of sociological science, there are many people who understand what kind of information is Tsarist, what is just everyday information, and what is just informational noise, that they simply need to ignore and not pay attention to. But then the question arises, how to act if you understand that this information is Tsarist, and you are not in the bodies of state power? The answer here is precisely that it is necessary to build Sobornost. Yes, Sobornost is built by people themselves, regardless of so-called social status. And it's not built thanks to the success in career ladder climbing, intrigue, promotion up the career ladder to higher positions. Sobornost is built through the personal development of everyone who understands this, the reaching by him or by her of the level where they are able to exert an impact on the psychodynamics of society, the psychodynamics of social groups. Only this way can Sobornost gradually penetrate into the spheres of state governance, into governance towards research and development, the economy, school, and indeed, no one will help us, neither God nor the Tsar nor the hero. We must do everything with our own hands. This is the theme of the former national anthem of the USSR, and then the party anthem, which the communists did not follow. In fact, this is what each and every one should do, working first of all on themselves, because if people remain the way they are, most of them are zombies, programmed by culture, sometimes falling into bestiality, in terms of functionality, executioners, deputies, but not sole commanders. Psychodynamics will generate what it already generates, and what the overwhelming majority of people do not like. Well, and accordingly, as for the theme of scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in the economy, here the primary task is to make understandable for everyone and accepted by everyone ideas that in fact all sociological theories that Western science and domestic officialdom offer us are nonsense that does not enable us to solve tasks. If this idea spreads in society, then the next question is inevitable. What could be an alternative? There is an alternative. The alternative has been worked out. This is the conception of social safety. Yes, someone can make a complaint about the content, the form of presentation, the stylistics, but if you think not by words, but by processes, then you are able to express the same conception of social safety in different terms, in different words. If something is missing there, and you really understand this, then you have process thinking. Then you can see a film that is not present in the conception of social safety in the form in which it is now, and you can describe this film in lexicon. If necessary, describe it in mathematical language. But no one will do it instead of you. History is such that it has led us all to the point where everyone must make a choice for their future and be determined in who they are. If someone does not want to do this, the destiny of grass on the battlefield is sometimes a happy one and sometimes not a very happy one. At this point we finish today's lecture. The thematics of statehood and state have been covered. If something is not clear, then again I ask you to read thick books. Fundamentals of Sociology, 6 volumes, Economics of Innovative Development, Dialectics and Atheism, 2 essences incompatible, and thanks to jurists, the work of the internal predictor by the name From Corporativeness Under the Veil of Ideas Towards Sobornost in the Kingdom of God on Earth is included in the Federal List of Extremist Materials. Therefore you cannot read it, because from the point of view of liberal jurists, Sobornost is a crime. But if following the principle, let the world collapse, but the law be fulfilled, in the juridical sense, then the world will surely collapse, because the laws written by feeble-minded, ignorant, and not always decent people, with the following of them, they doom society to self-liquidation, the biosphere to destruction by this society. But if we develop science and technology, then the world can really collapse. So follow the principle, sinless before God, innocent before the Tsar. And for this, one must previously remember, previously feel, previously think, previously act. And the transformation of the whole earth will take place. That is it for today. In the next lectures we will move on to questions of economics.